Cop harasses elderly man in the park, has no idea who's standing behind watching everything. The sun had just started to rise over the quiet Oakwood neighborhood. Light spilled through the tall trees, casting soft golden shadows on the walking path. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air was cool, fresh, like a calm before the world really wakes up. On a weathered wooden bench near the center of the park, an elderly man sat alone, sipping from a white mug. He wore a neat shirt, light, jacket, and clean slacks. His name was Mr. Charles Thompson. For nearly 30 years, this was his morning ritual. Same bench, same time, same peace. He looked out at the open field, the flowers, the playground still empty from the night. With him sat a cane, and on his lap, a folded newspaper. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. After so many years, this park felt more like home than his own living room. But then, that peace? It was broken. Boots stepped onto the gravel path. Fast, firm. A young voice followed. "Hey, excuse me, sir." A police officer, early 30s maybe, walked up with purpose. His name tag read Daniels. His hand hovered just near his belt. Not threatening, but close enough to feel like a warning. Mr. Thompson looked up, surprised but polite. "Good morning, officer," he said. Daniels didn't return the greeting. "Do you live around here?" "I do," Mr. Thompson replied. "Just a few blocks over, Maple Street." The officer frowned. "I've never seen you before." Mr. Thompson gave a soft chuckle. "Well, I've been here longer than this park has existed, son." That comment didn't sit well. Daniels crossed his arms. "Do you have proof of that?" Charles raised an eyebrow, trying to stay calm. "I'm not carrying a bill or ID to drink coffee in a public park. I come here every morning." Daniels didn't move. "Well, I need to see something. I can't just take your word for it." Charles's fingers tightened slightly around his cane. The tension in his chest wasn't just from his heart. It was from history, from years of being doubted, questioned, looked at like he didn't belong. He took a breath. "Officer, I'm not causing trouble. I'm just enjoying my morning like I always do." Daniel stepped closer. "If you can't prove where you live, you'll need to leave. We've had reports of loitering." At that word, loitering, Charles finally folded his paper and set it aside. "I've spent more mornings in this park than you've spent in that uniform. I'm not loitering. I'm living." Daniels's jaw tightened. He stepped even closer. "Look, old man." But what neither of them noticed was that they weren't alone. On a nearby bench, half shielded by a tree, sat a man who had arrived even before Mr. Thompson. He looked like just another early riser. Hoodie, ball cap, coffee cup resting in his hands. But his eyes hadn't left the exchange since it began. Not once. He watched Daniels's tone, his stance, watched how Charles tried to stay calm, watched the moment things started to turn from uncomfortable to unacceptable. And that man? He wasn't just watching. He was listening. Every word, every pause, and he had the power to change everything. Back on the main path, Daniels placed his hand lightly on Charles's shoulder. "I'm asking you to move." Charles leaned back slightly. "I'm asking you to calm down." Daniels's hand dropped to his belt, not to his gun, but just close enough. And then, "Officer, step away from him." The voice was loud, clear, firm. It didn't shout, but it didn't need to. Daniels froze. Charles turned his head, eyes narrowing in the direction of the voice. From that bench under the tree, the man in the hoodie stood up. He took off his cap. And for the first time, Daniels recognized him. His eyes widened, because standing there wasn't just some bystander. It was Chief Raymond Mitchell, the head of the police department. Charles blinked. "Raymond," Chief Mitchell nodded once. "It's all right, Charles. I've got this now." Daniel stammered. "Chief, I didn't know." Mitchell raised a hand. We'll talk. Later. Right now, step back." Daniels obeyed. Quickly, Mr. Thompson didn't say a word. He just looked down at the spilled coffee beside his bench, the pages of his newspaper fluttering slightly in the breeze. The silence was thick, but something had shifted, because now the whole park was watching. And what happened next would leave the entire police force stunned. Mr. Thompson adjusted his jacket and slowly reached down to pick up his cane. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from frustration. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned his presence somewhere. He belonged, but it still hit the same, every time. Chief Mitchell moved closer, standing between the two men now. His expression was unreadable, part calm, part simmering disappointment. "Charles," he said gently, "are you all right?" Mr. Thompson nodded, slowly, catching his breath. "I will be, Raymond. I just need a moment." Daniels stood there, stiff, unsure whether to defend himself or disappear into the ground. His posture had shifted completely, from tough to trapped. "Sir, I was just doing my job. I didn't know who he was." The chief's head turned slightly. Not aggressive, just focused. "That's the problem, Officer Daniels. You didn't care who he was. You didn't even stop to ask yourself why you felt the need to question him in the first place." Daniels opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For once, silence spoke louder. Mr. Thompson had settled back on the bench. His cane rested beside him again, his breathing slower now. He looked over at Daniels, not with anger, but something heavier. Something more painful. "You looked at me like I didn't belong," he said quietly. "But I've walked these paths longer than you've been alive." Daniel's gaze dropped to the ground. Behind them, a few people had gathered at a respectful distance. Not close enough to interfere, but close enough to see something wasn't right. A woman walking her dog paused. A jogger slowed to a walk. A kid on a bike circled once, then coasted to a stop under a tree. Mr. Thompson turned to the chief. "I don't want trouble. I just want to sit in my park and drink my coffee in peace." Chief Mitchell nodded. "And that's exactly what you should be able to do." He turned back to Daniels. "Report to the station. I'll deal with you there." Daniels hesitated. "Chief, Now." Daniels gave a short nod, then walked off, his footsteps oddly quieter than before. The park slowly returned to its stillness, but something had changed. The air felt heavier. The chief sat down beside Mr. Thompson, the two of them side by side on that old wooden bench like they'd done years ago, back when Mitchell was just a teenager and Thompson had been the one offering advice. "I'm sorry that happened," Mitchell said. Mr. Thompson didn't respond right away. He just looked out at the park, at the trees he helped plant, the benches he helped pick, the fountain he once cut the ribbon for. "You know," he said softly, "I thought we were past this." "I did too," the chief admitted. "But it's clear we're not. Not yet." They sat in silence again, and then Mr. Thompson let out a tired sigh. "When I was a boy, this land was a dirt lot. Nothing but weeds and broken bottles. My friends and I used to dream about what it could be someday. And when the city finally agreed to build something here, I poured my soul into this place." "I remember," said the chief. "My dad told me all about it. He said you made sure the park had space for everyone, rich or poor, young or old. Black, white, didn't matter." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "I believed in what this park could be. Still do. But it breaks my heart that after all this time, sitting on this bench still feels like a protest." A breeze passed through, rustling the trees. A page from his newspaper fluttered by his foot. He bent slowly to pick it up. The chief leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let me do something about this, Charles. Not just about Daniels. About all of it." Mr. Thompson glanced sideways. What are you thinking?" "I want you to speak to my officers," Chief Mitchell said. "All of them. Not just about what happened today, but about everything. Your life, your work, your truth. They need to hear it." Charles was quiet again. He tapped his cane lightly on the path. "I'm tired, Raymond. I've told these stories for decades. I've marched, spoken, fought. I'm not sure anyone's really listening anymore." "They will this time," the chief said firmly. "Because now they have to." Mr. Thompson looked out over the park again. A child was laughing near the fountain. A man tossed a ball to his dog. Life went on. But beneath it all was something else, something quietly shifting. "You really think it'll make a difference?" he asked. "I do," Mitchell said. "And I think you're the only one who can help them see what they've been blind to." Mr. Thompson didn't answer right away. He just watched the water sparkle in the fountain he helped design, watched the morning sun climb a little higher in the sky. Then finally he said, "All right, I'll do it." And that moment, right there on that park bench, might not have made headlines. But it was the moment everything began to change. A few days had passed since that morning in the park, but the moment hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown louder. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Not just about the confrontation, but about who Mr. Thompson was. A few people had known. Some had heard stories, but many didn't realize they'd walked past a living piece of history every morning and never even stopped to say hello. Now they knew. The man who sat with a cup of coffee and a newspaper on that old wooden bench wasn't just an elder from the neighborhood. He had once been the heartbeat of it. And now, that heartbeat had been shaken. Back at the station, Chief Mitchell sat in his office staring at a blank page. He'd started writing a department-wide memo 5 times, deleted every version. Nothing seemed strong enough or honest enough for what needed to be said. He finally got up, walked out of the building, and made his way back to Oakwood Park. Mr. Thompson was there, like always. Same spot, same time. A light gray cap on his head today, cane resting against the bench arm. Chief Mitchell didn't say a word at first. He just sat down beside him. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. Charles looked over. "That's dangerous." The chief smiled, just a little. "You remember back when I was 15? You caught me and my cousin sneaking out of the old corner store with sodas we hadn't paid for." Mr. Thompson nodded, chuckling quietly. "I do. I didn't call the cops. I called your mother." "Yup, and I never forgot the whooping I got either." They both laughed lightly, but the laughter didn't last long. "You didn't just stop me from making a mistake," the chief continued. "You showed me a different path. You told me that boys like me were either going to be feared or followed, depending on the choices we made." Charles nodded slowly. "That's still true." The chief leaned forward, folding his hands. "You gave me direction. You didn't just preach, you showed up. Every meeting, every cleanup, every community dinner. You made this place feel like ours. And I don't know if I ever said it, but you made me believe I could be more than what people expected." Charles didn't reply right away. His eyes were on a pair of kids tossing a frisbee back and forth nearby. One white, one black, laughing like they had no idea the world could be any different. Finally, he said, "So what are you going to do with that belief, Raymond?" Mitchell took a breath. "I want to do something real, not just a memo, not just a statement for the press. I want my officers to see what I see. I want them to hear what I heard all those years ago." Charles turned his head. "You want me? To lecture a room full of uniforms?" "Not lecture," Mitchell said. "Speak, teach, share. Make them uncomfortable if you have to, but help them understand." The older man was quiet for a long while. Then he finally nodded. "All right, but I'm not going alone." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "You've got a backup crew?" Charles smirked. "I've been watching this. Next generation. They're sharp, they're angry, but they're smart. They've seen enough to speak, and they need to be heard too. We can't fix this unless we bring them with us." The chief smiled. "You always were 3 steps ahead." That afternoon, Charles made a few calls, one to the young mother who had sat beside him weeks ago, baby sleeping in her arms. Another to a teen he'd seen painting murals over boarded-up shop windows. And one to a quiet young man who often sat alone by the water with a notebook full of poems and dreams of change. By the end of the week, they had a small group. Not activists, not politicians, just people, young, old, and in between, who cared deeply and were tired of being invisible. They met at the community center just off Pine Street. No agenda, no script, just chairs in a circle and space to speak. One young man broke the silence first. "I grew up here, but I've always felt like a guest, like the city's watching me, waiting for me to mess up." A girl next to him nodded. "Same. I've never been in trouble, but I've been followed through stores more times than I can count." Charles sat quietly, listening, really listening. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't to give advice. It was to offer something deeper. "I've been alive long enough to see this country change in ways I never thought it would," he said. "But I've also seen it stay the same in the ways that matter most. This is our moment. If we're brave enough to stand together, we don't have to ask for permission to belong." They looked at him, some with wide eyes, others with tears quietly forming. The group decided they would all speak at the precinct. Together, no scripts. Just truth. And Mr. Thompson? He'd go first. Because once again, the quiet man on the park bench was about to speak up. And this time, the whole city would be listening. The day had come. It was overcast. Clouds heavy with the kind of silence that holds the air still. Like even the sky knew something important was about to happen. Mr. Thompson stood at his hallway mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He'd worn this one for occasions that mattered: community meetings, funerals, the opening ceremony of Oakwood Park. He smoothed it gently, his fingers pausing on the worn fabric near the collar. It was fraying slightly, but he didn't mind. It had held up, just like he had. His eyes met their reflection. Not proud, not nervous, just ready. He stepped outside, greeted by the cool breeze and the soft creak of his porch. One by one, the small group joined him. The young mother, the teenage artist, the quiet boy with the notebook. No one said much. They didn't need to. Everyone knew this wasn't just another meeting. It was a conversation that had been waiting years to happen. At the police precinct, officers gathered in a large room used mostly for briefings and training sessions. Today, though, it felt different. Chairs were set up in tight rows. Some officers leaned back, arms crossed. Others sat forward, curious. A few just looked, uncomfortable. Chief Mitchell stood near the door, his expression serious but hopeful. Then Mr. Thompson entered. The room quieted instantly. Some officers recognized him. Others just saw an old man with a cane and a slow walk. But what they all felt, whether they understood it or not, was the weight he carried. Not because of age, but because of experience. He reached the front, turned, and stood still for a moment, letting the silence speak first. Then, with a deep breath, he began, "I'm not here to shame you. I'm not here to yell. I've done enough of both over the years, and it rarely changes hearts. What I am here to do is tell you what it feels like to be seen as a threat when you're just trying to live." He looked around the room, meeting eyes where he could. "I've walked this city longer than most of you have worn those uniforms. I've been a boy here, a builder, a mentor, and an old man trying to enjoy a bench I helped install. And still, that badge," he said, motioning gently toward the uniforms, "can turn a good morning into a warning." Some officers shifted. A few looked away. Others stared at him, unmoving. I want you to imagine waking up and already feeling like you have to prove you deserve to exist, not because of anything you've done, but because of what you look like. That's the weight Black and brown folks carry every single day. He let the words settle, not rushing. Then, he stepped aside and nodded at the group behind him. One by one, they came forward. The teenage boy, barely 17, stepped up next. He didn't speak loud, but every word landed. I write poetry. I paint. I take care of my little brothers while my mom works double shifts. And still, I've been stopped 4 times in the last year. Once just for carrying my sketchbook home. I'm not asking to be treated special. I'm just asking to be seen for who I am. The young mother followed, cradling her toddler. My baby doesn't know the word fear yet. And I pray every day that by the time he does, it won't be because of someone in uniform pulling him aside for no reason. You all say you protect and serve. I want to believe that includes us. Her voice cracked a little. A few officers lowered their eyes. Then came the artist, a girl in her early 20s who wore her truth like a badge of her own. You don't know how many murals I've painted with messages of hope, only to feel invisible walking back home. I thought maybe my art could soften this city's hard edges, but hope fades when you're followed for no reason. That needs to change. By the time they finished, the room felt heavier, but more awake. Mr. Thompson stepped forward again. His voice quieter now. We're not asking for perfection. We're asking for awareness. We're asking for the kind of respect that shouldn't have to be earned. He looked straight at the officers. Start seeing us not as strangers, not as suspects, but as neighbors. A long pause followed. Then from the middle of the room, a woman stood. Officer Delgado, 10 years on the force. She cleared her throat. I've worn this badge with pride, but hearing all of this, I realize that pride means nothing if we're blind to the pain we're causing. Thank you, all of you, for speaking your truth. It's not easy. Her words seemed to open a door. Another officer raised his hand. How can we fix this? I want to help, but I don't know where to start. Mr. Thompson didn't smile. He didn't lecture. He simply said, start by listening every day, and when you see something wrong, even in your own department, don't stay quiet. Courage isn't just for the streets. It's for the locker rooms, too. Somewhere in the back of the room, an officer exhaled. Not loud, but deep. Like something he'd been holding finally let go, and that was the beginning. Not a miracle, not a fix, but a beginning. Change didn't come all at once. It didn't storm through the front door of the precinct or shake the city from its sleep overnight. It came like most things worth waiting for, quietly, slowly, from the inside out. After that meeting, the station didn't erupt in applause. There were no dramatic speeches, no big promises made in the heat of the moment. But something had shifted. You could feel it. A subtle drop in the usual tension. A few more open eyes. A few officers lingering in their chairs after everyone else had gone, not saying a word, just sitting with what they had heard. Chief Mitchell walked out with Mr. Thompson and the youth team. The hallway was silent, but respectful. Heads nodded. 1 or 2 officers even stepped forward, not to explain, not to defend, just to say thank you before heading back to their duties. Outside, the group gathered on the front steps. No one spoke right away. The young artist wiped her palms on her jeans. The poet boy stared out at the street, quiet as always. Then the mother turned to Mr. Thompson. Do you think it made a difference? Charles looked up at the sky. The clouds had finally broken. Sunlight stretched across the pavement. I think someone in that room needed to hear it, he said. And I think they'll carry it forward in ways we can't see yet. That was enough for now. The next day, a photo from the meeting began circulating online. Nothing flashy, just a side angle of Mr. Thompson at the podium, cane leaning against the table, eyes steady. Someone had added a quote underneath in bold, "We don't want to be seen as suspects, just neighbors." It caught fire. Not in a viral, shallow way, but in a way that touched people. Folks from the neighborhood started sharing stories in the comments, stories that had never made the news. An older woman talked about being stopped on her way to church. A teenage boy admitted he no longer took shortcuts through certain blocks, even in daylight. And dozens more chimed in saying, "That could have been my father, my brother, me." Soon after, Chief Mitchell called a meeting with the city council, not behind closed doors, public. He told them, "We need to fix what's broken, not just in training, but in how we walk these streets, how we hear our people." He proposed a new outreach program, community circles where residents and officers would meet not for complaints, not for orders, but for conversation. No uniforms, no ranks, just human beings side by side. And he asked Mr. Thompson to lead. Charles agreed, but with one condition. "You let the young ones take the lead. I'll guide them, but it's their time now." That's how it started. Week by week, park by park, church basements, school gyms, community centers, a folding table, a circle of chairs, a pot of coffee, and truth. People came, some curious, some cautious, some angry. But they came, and they stayed. At first, the officers kept their distance. It was hard, uncomfortable, like walking into a room full of mirrors. But then, one officer, just one, stood up during a session and said, "I didn't realize how differently we experience the same neighborhood." He looked at the young poet and said, "I see you walking all the time. I never thought to wave, but maybe that's where I should start." The poet nodded, said nothing. But later that week, they passed each other again, and the officer raised his hand in a quiet hello. The boy waved back. That's how change began to grow. The mother from the team started organizing Know Your Rights sessions for parents and teens, not to scare them, but to empower them. The artist led a mural project across the community, painting scenes of unity, respect, and memory. One wall featured a giant version of Mr. Thompson's quote. Below it, she painted a bench with a steaming coffee mug resting gently on it. People stopped in front of that mural like it was a monument. And Mr. Thompson? He came to every event, every meeting, even when his knees ached and the wind pushed too hard. He didn't say much anymore. He didn't have to. Just being there reminded everyone what this was about. One evening, after a particularly long session, he sat with the chief again on the old bench in Oakwood Park. "Funny," Charles said, sipping his coffee. "This bench has seen so much." Mitchell smiled. "It's more than a bench. It's history, it's memory, it's home." They watched as kids ran through the grass, teens laughed by the fountain, and a patrol car rolled slowly by. Windows down, officer nodding at the families instead of just driving past. "I think we're starting to see what we built," Mitchell said. Charles didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the community, his community, and saw not perfection, not peace, but progress. He nodded. "Let's keep building." It had been weeks since that morning in Oakwood Park, since the confrontation, since the truth was spoken, in a room full of uniforms. Since the community began to stir, stretch, and slowly, carefully, begin healing. Mr. Thompson's days had returned to a kind of rhythm. Mornings at the park, afternoons in the community center, evenings sometimes spent alone with a cup of tea and a stack of old photographs, memories captured in fading tones of brown and gold. But on one Thursday morning, as the sun rose warm and clear, something happened that wasn't part of the routine. A knock at the door. Mr. Thompson moved slowly, hand gripping his cane, and opened it to find a familiar face, one he hadn't expected. Officer Daniels, but he wasn't in uniform. No badge, no belt, no coldness in his posture. Just a young man, shoulders lower, face tight with something hard to define. Guilt, maybe. Maybe something deeper. "Mr. Thompson," he said quietly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Charles looked at him for a moment. Not unkindly, but not easily either. "Come in," he said finally. "We don't have to stand on the porch for this." They moved inside. The house smelled of old wood and coffee grounds. Walls lined with books, framed photos, and quiet strength. Daniels sat down on the edge of the couch. "Mr. Thompson lowered himself into the chair opposite, a long silence. Finally, Daniels broke it. "I wanted to come sooner," he said. "But I didn't know how, or if I even should." Mr. Thompson didn't respond, just watched him, waiting. Daniels continued, "I've been doing a lot of thinking, since that day in the park, since the meeting at the station, since the chief sat me down and made me listen to everything I didn't want to hear." He paused. "I'm not proud of who I was that morning. I thought I was doing my job. But looking back, I wasn't protecting anything. I was acting out of assumptions, out of fear I didn't even know I had." His voice wavered, and he looked down at his hands. "You were just sitting there, and I made you feel like you didn't belong." "You didn't make me feel it," Charles said softly. "You confirmed what I've felt too many times." Daniels nodded slowly, that truth cutting clean but deserved. "I left the force," he said quietly. "Turned in my badge last week." Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because they made you?" Daniels shook his head. "No, they gave me a choice. Retraining, desk duty, maybe even full reinstatement after some time. But I realized I don't want to carry authority without understanding the weight of it. I've enrolled in a social work program, night classes. I want to help people in a different way." Charles leaned back in his chair, arms folded lightly. "And why are you telling me all this?" Daniels swallowed. "Because the change I'm trying to make in myself? It started with you, with how you stood there, steady, calm, refusing to be erased." He paused, voice barely above a whisper. "And I never said I'm sorry. Not properly." He looked up. "So, I am. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. For my words, my actions, for not seeing you." Mr. Thompson was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that surprised them both. "I forgive you." Daniels blinked, clearly caught off guard. "But that doesn't mean we forget," Charles added. "That morning wasn't about just me. It was about a pattern, a history, a system that still sees people like me as a question mark before a person." Daniels nodded. "I know. I'm trying to unlearn it. I'm trying to change." Mr. Thompson leaned forward slightly. "Then make sure you change more than just yourself. That uniform didn't make you act that way, but it gave you permission to. If you're serious about helping people, remember what it felt like to hold that power and misuse it." Daniel sat with those words like a weight settling into his chest. "I will," he said. "I promise." Charles nodded, slowly. "Then you've got work to do." Daniel stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Thank you for your time, for this conversation. I'll never forget it." Mr. Thompson gave a small nod. "Don't just remember it, use it." Daniel stepped out into the morning light, no longer a man in authority, but one in reflection. And as Charles watched him disappear down the street, he didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. What he felt was something more rare, a quiet, cautious hope. Because real change, it's slow, it's painful. But every so often, it knocks on your door wearing the face of someone you once feared and asks if it can start over. Spring returned to Oakwood Park with a quiet kind of beauty. The trees were just beginning to bloom again, their branches stretching wide like open arms. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the playground, and the air smelled of new grass, and the kind of peace that feels earned. Mr. Thompson sat on his usual bench, cane beside him, a mug of coffee cradled in both hands. The same routine, the same place, but everything felt different now, not louder, not busier, just fuller, more alive. He looked around slowly. Where once he sat in solitude, now the space around him moved with purpose. Across the lawn, 2 police, officers in simple polo shirts, no vests, no belts, were helping a group of kids plant flowers near the fountain. One of them, a young woman, knelt down beside a child and handed him a tiny spade. A few feet away, that same fountain sparkled, in the sun. The plaque at its base read, "The Charles Thompson Fountain," in honor of a man who helped build more than a park. Nearby, teenagers were painting a mural along the side of the community building, bold strokes of color swirling into the faces of elders, children, and everyday heroes. In the center of it all was an image of a bench, under a tree, with a single steaming cup resting on it. Mr. Thompson's eyes softened. He recognized the scene. He recognized the message. From the edge of the mural, the young artist, the same girl who'd spoken bravely at the precinct months ago, walked over to him, wiping paint from her hands with an old rag. She smiled. "It's almost done. We're calling it the Listening Bench. After you." He smiled gently, chuckling. "Hope I'm not being replaced." She shook her head. "No, sir. You're being remembered." Just then, the young poet approached, taller now, more sure of himself. He carried a small notebook, flipping through it before stopping in front of Mr. Thompson. "I was hoping I could read something," he said, a little shy. Mr. Thompson nodded. "Always." The boy cleared his throat and began. "You sat where storms once settled, a bench beneath a sky that never quite cleared. You didn't yell, you didn't run. You stood, and because you stood, we started walking. You told us justice isn't loud, it's steady. It's not a fire. It's a lamp in the dark, passed from hand to hand, still burning after all this time." He looked up, eyes glinting, with quiet emotion. Mr. Thompson didn't say anything at first. He just reached out, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and gave a single, heartfelt nod. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "You keep that fire lit." In the distance, the familiar sound of footsteps on gravel, the young man approached slowly. Once Officer Daniels, now just Michael. He wore plain clothes, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and in his hand, a flyer for the new youth mentorship program he'd started with the community center. He nodded, respectfully toward Mr. Thompson. "I'm keeping my promise," he said. "It's small, but it's something." Charles looked him over. He could see the weight Michael still carried. But he also saw the shift in his posture, the kind that doesn't come from training, but from soul work. "You've still got growing to do," Mr. Thompson said. "But you're facing the right direction now. That's what matters." Michael gave a humble smile. "Thank you for not shutting the door on me." Charles shook his head slowly. "Every generation has to decide whether to build walls or bridges. I spent my life trying to tear down the first kind and build the second. Now it's your turn to keep building." As the afternoon sun drifted lower, the park swelled with neighbors. People gathered in circles, some laughing, some talking seriously. A city official chatted with a group of high schoolers. An older man played chess with a boy who couldn't have been older than 10. Music played softly from a speaker resting on a picnic blanket. It was the same park, but this wasn't the same place. Mr. Thompson sat back, watching it all unfold, like a moving mural. The people, the conversations, the color, the motion, the community, his community, Not just existing, but connecting. The young mother from the precinct meeting arrived, her now toddler racing ahead of her, giggling toward the sandbox. She spotted Charles and waved. He's walking now. Too fast for me to catch sometimes, he smiled. That's what we're working for, a world they can run through without fear. She came closer, sitting beside him. You know what he asked me yesterday? He said, Mommy, why does the park have Mr. Thompson's name on it? Charles turned to her with raised eyebrows. What did you tell him? She grinned. I told him you helped build it. Not just the ground, but the feeling. I said the park feels safe because you made it feel like home. He looked down at his coffee, then out again at the trees, the fountain, the laughter. After a moment, he whispered, mostly to himself, That's all I ever wanted. The sky turned orange, the sun dipping behind the trees. The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves, above the bench. It was the same sound he'd heard every morning for decades, but now it felt like a whisper of gratitude, of goodbye. Mr. Thompson closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, sharper than before, because the fight wasn't over, the work wasn't done, but for the first time in a long time. He didn't feel alone in it. All around him were hands ready to carry the torch. Hands that looked different from his, spoke in different rhythms, but believed in the same thing. That every person deserves to sit in peace. That every voice deserves to be heard. That justice doesn't retire. And hope doesn't grow old. As the stars began to peek through the deepening blue above Oakwood Park, Charles Thompson smiled, placed his hand gently on the bench, and stayed a little longer. Because this was what legacy looked like.